If you're a Canadian living in the United States, your retirement planning is probably more complicated than you think. Over the last decade, working with Canadians who have moved to the United States, I've seen the same retirement mistakes happen time and time again. And sometimes these retirement mistakes can cost people tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars over their lifetime. The tricky part is most of these mistakes aren't obvious. It happens when you have retirement benefits and accounts in two different countries, taxes in two different countries, and financial planners who aren't experienced in this type of work. So in this video, I'm going to walk through the 6 biggest retirement mistakes I see Canadians make after moving to the United States, and more importantly, how you can avoid them. Hello, my name is Bryan Haggard. I'm a certified financial planner, chartered financial analyst, and I'm the founder of Retirement and Financial. We help simplify your cross-border retirement plan. And if you're a Canadian living in the United States and you've contributed to both the Canadian and US retirement systems, understanding how those pieces fit together can have a major impact on your long-term financial outcome. If you like to see how your CPP, Social Security, and OAS all work together in your situation, we've created a personalized cross-border benefit estimate that you can download using the link below. It's designed specifically for Canadians living in the United States and can help you better understand how your retirement benefits may be coordinated. Just click on the link in the description below to download your estimate. Now let's get into the 6 biggest mistakes I see Canadians who retire in the US make. The first mistake that we see is not coordinating your Social Security and Canada Pension Plan benefits. For most of our clients, they've lived and worked in both the US and Canada for 15, 20 years each, and they're eligible for both Social Security and their CPP or Canada Pension up in Canada, but they're unaware about when to turn these on or even how big these benefits are. The good news is that there's a totalization agreement between the US and Canada that makes qualifying for these benefits easier. And you can go onto the Social Security website to get your estimate pretty easy, and you can call Service Canada to get your CPP benefit pretty easy. But that's where the complexities start. Now you need to determine when to turn these on. Do you turn them both on at retirement, where maybe they're lower benefits, but you get the money earlier? Do you delay both of them until they're higher benefits in the future? Do you turn on one early and then the other later? And one of the biggest kind of problems or questions that people have is, how is my spouse involved with all of this if you're married as well? Because that brings on a whole other issue that you have to deal with. So making sure when you're retiring that you're coordinating when to turn on both your US and Social Security benefits is a huge part of your retirement income plan, and you want to get that right. I would say the biggest mistake that I see people make every single day as we're going through their cross-border retirement income plan is this misunderstanding about their OAS benefits up in Canada. I hear this all the time. Hey, Bryan, I don't qualify for OAS because I didn't live in Canada for long enough. Or, hey, Bryan, I'm not going to turn my OAS benefit on anyway here in the States because Canada's just going to claw it back anyway because I earn too much money. Both of those tend to be mistakes that we hear. Now, first and foremost, why there's a mistake is a lot of people think that in order to qualify for OAS, you have to have resided in Canada for 20 years after the age of 18. But that's not necessarily the case. You can actually combine your US work years plus your Canadian residency after age 18 to qualify for OAS. So a lot of our clients, maybe they left Canada at 33, 35 years old. They don't think they qualify for OAS. And when we actually go through the retirement plan, we find out that they might qualify for $400 a month in OAS benefits. The second mistake is here in the United States, there is no OAS income clawback. You can earn as much as possible and still collect a full amount of OAS that you're eligible for. That's not the case if you move back to Canada. So knowing your OAS benefits, collecting those OAS benefits are a huge part of most of our clients' retirement, and a lot of people get that wrong. The third mistake that we see often for Canadians living in the United States is poor RRSP withdrawal timing. I get a call probably every couple weeks from somebody who's watched our videos and says, "Hey Brian, I'm working with a US financial advisor. They're suggesting that I withdraw all of my RRSP and move those funds down there." And the issue with that for a lot of those people is that the timing behind that might cause them ten or even hundreds of thousands of dollars of additional taxes by taking all of that money out while they're here in the US, while they're still working in the US. The other issue, though, that we see a lot is people just not dealing with their RRSP, just allowing it to grow and grow and grow throughout retirement. And then all of a sudden, at age 72, they're forced to start taking that money out. At the same time, they're drawing US Social Security benefits and they're pretty close to having to take out their US retirement accounts as well. And that can push people into really high tax brackets here in the United States. Having an RRSP withdrawal strategy, either taking it all out when you have very little US income or taking it out year by year at retirement, tends to be a much better strategy than taking it all out while you're working or trying to just delay it and deal with it later. That's a huge problem that we see and a mistake that we see often for Canadians living here in the US. The fourth mistake that we see often for Canadians who are now retiring in the US is not having a valid or good US estate plan. So many people that we work with, when we first start talking to them, they created a will up in Canada, but they've never gotten anything down here in the United States. And for most of those people, that will up in Canada is invalid as a US resident. So for most people, they should at least have a US will if you're down here in the United States, but a US will also doesn't solve all of your problems. If you have real estate up in Canada, that US will is probably not going to deal with that or some of the other assets that you have up there. A US will also doesn't avoid probate here in the US. So for a lot of our clients, a will isn't even enough. They actually might go out and get a trust. However, there's some complexities with having a trust, especially if your beneficiaries or if your successor trustees are located up in Canada. Estate planning is complicated if you've lived and worked in both the US and Canada, and it's really important that you get it right. And that's one of the big mistakes we see a lot of cross-border retirees make. Another huge mistake that we see Canadians that are now living in the US make are around tax filing. And really, where that comes down to are some of the forms that you are required to fill out, you may not actually be filling out and completing. For example, if you have over $10,000 of assets up in Canada, and that includes RRSPs and other retirement accounts, you should be filing an FBAR every single year. That's not with your taxes, but it is a separate form that needs to be filed. And if you're single and have over 75,000 of assets up in Canada, or married and having over $150,000 of assets up in Canada, including retirement accounts, you should also be filing a Form 8938 every single year with your taxes. Now, if you have Canadian mutual funds or TFSAs up in Canada and you're now living in the US, that's a whole nother tax issue that you absolutely want to avoid. Not filing these appropriate forms on a year-to-year basis can result in over $16,000 a year in penalties, even if it's non-willful. So it's really, really important that if you're a Canadian living in the US and you still have assets, retirement accounts, investments up in Canada, that you are filing the appropriate tax forms. The last big mistake that we see a lot of Canadians who are now living in the US make is having the wrong RRSP tax withholding when they take the money out. Now, I added this to the video because I literally got a call yesterday from somebody, and their question was, "Hey Brian, I watch your videos. I'm taking money out of my RRSPs, I'm paying a ton of money on withholding to Canada, but a lot of that's not actually translating to my US tax return as foreign tax credits. When we started to talk about it, what we noticed is he was actually taking money from he converted his RRSP to a RIF. He was taking money out of his RIF, which typically, if you take money out of an RIF in Canada as a US resident, the withholding is only 15%. However, he was having 25% withheld up in Canada. What that meant on his $50,000 withdrawals that he was taking out every year, he was paying an additional $5,000 in taxes to Canada that he didn't need to be paying. Making sure you have the right RRSP withholding is extremely important. And the problem is, if you call somebody up in Canada, a representative, there's a really good chance that they don't know the proper withholding for US residents because the withholding for US residents are different than those for Canadian residents. You want to make sure that you know what that withholding is, that you can tell that to the representative so you have the right amount withheld on those RRSP withdrawals so that you're not paying additional taxes more than you need to. Thank you so much for listening today. If you found this video helpful, be sure to subscribe because I regularly post videos about financial planning strategies for Canadians here in the United States. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.